The weight of the Bible in my hands had never felt so heavy. 18 years of familiar, of certainty, rested in my palms as I stood before the glass door of Brood Awakening, my reflection a stranger against the warm glow within. Behind me, the parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few cars I didn't recognize and wouldn't know how to name. My father had only ever driven our buggy or occasionally borrowed Brother Levi's truck for supply runs. I adjusted my suspenders, plain black against a light blue shirt that already felt like a betrayal to wear without a proper vest. My Rumspringa. 3 months to see what lay beyond our community's boundaries. 3 months to strengthen my resolve before baptism, before committing forever to the only way of life I'd ever known. "It's just coffee," I whispered to myself, the words forming a small cloud in the autumn air. "Just coffee." The bell above the door announced my entrance with a cheerful jingle that made me flinch. Warm air scented with something rich and earthy, wrapped around me like a forgotten embrace. Music I didn't recognize played softly from invisible speakers, guitars and voices singing words I couldn't quite make out. "Take a seat anywhere. I'll be right with you." The voice came from behind a large silver machine that hissed and gurgled like nothing I'd ever heard. I clutched my Bible tighter and chose the table farthest from the counter, tucked into a corner where shadows might hide my uncertainty. From here, I could see everything. The chalkboard menu with its foreign vocabulary, macchiato, affogato, cortado, the glass case filled with pastries, the walls lined with paintings of landscapes that looked nothing like the fertile Lancaster fields I'd worked all my life. I was studying the menu, lips silently forming the strange words, when he emerged from behind the counter. "First time here?" I looked up, startled, into eyes the color of chestnuts in autumn. The young man, perhaps 3 or 4 years my senior, stood with relaxed shoulders, a black apron tied around his narrow waist, dark hair pushed carelessly to one side. His smile revealed a slight crookedness to his front teeth that somehow made the perfection of the rest of his face bearable to look at. "Is it?" My voice caught. I cleared my throat. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed, and something in my chest tightened. "Only a little. That, plus I know pretty much everyone who comes in regularly." He extended his hand. "I'm Daniel." I stared at his outstretched palm for a moment before remembering to reach forward. "Eli," I offered. "Eli Yoder." His hand was warm, fingers calloused in different places than mine, not from fieldwork and carpentry, but from something I couldn't identify. "Well, Eli Yoder, what can I get you today? First-timer recommendation is our house blend, but if you're feeling adventurous..." He trailed off, eyebrows raised in gentle challenge. "I've never had coffee before," I admitted, heat creeping up my neck. "What do you suggest?" Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Never? Not even at home?" I shook my head. "It's considered worldly. My father says it clouds the mind." Understanding dawned on his face as his eyes flicked briefly to my plain clothes, my hair cut in the traditional bowl shape, not yet grown out in these first weeks of freedom. "Amish?" he asked, without a trace of mockery. I nodded, waiting for the usual reaction, curiosity or worse, condescension. "Rumspringa?" Another nod. Daniel smiled, but not in the way the tourists did when they passed our farms, snapping photos as though we were exhibits in a living museum. "Then we should make your first coffee something special," he said. "Trust me?" The question hung between us, weightier than it had any right to be. Trust him. I didn't even know what coffee tasted like, yet I heard myself say, "Yes." Daniel returned to his post behind the counter, moving with practiced grace between gleaming machines. I watched his hands, steady, confident, as they operated levers and buttons, measured grounds into a small metal basket, and tamped them down with focused precision. There was something meditative in watching him work, something almost sacred in his quiet concentration. Minutes later, he placed a white ceramic cup before me. Steam rose in delicate wisps from a rich, mahogany liquid topped with a swirl of white. "Classic cappuccino," he explained. "Espresso with steamed milk and a little foam. Not too strong, not too sweet." He hesitated, then added, "On the house." First, coffee should be free. Before I could protest, he was gone, greeting a new customer at the door. I stared down at the cup, inhaling the unfamiliar aroma. Carefully, I lifted it to my lips and took a tentative sip. Heat bloomed across my tongue, followed by a bitterness that made me wince, then a surprising sweetness as the milk cut through. It was nothing like I expected. Complex, layered with flavors I had no names for. I glanced toward the counter to find Daniel watching me, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He raised an eyebrow in question. I nodded, offering a tentative thumbs up. His smile widened before he turned back to his work. As the initial shock of the flavor faded, I found myself taking another sip, then another. The warmth spread through my chest, a gentle awakening. I pulled my Bible closer, opening to where I'd left off in Proverbs, but the familiar words blurred before me. Instead, my eyes kept drifting to the counter, where Daniel now bent over something at the register, a pencil moving across what appeared to be a napkin. His forehead creased in concentration. Occasionally, he'd pause, chew thoughtfully on the end of his pencil, then resume with renewed purpose. I wondered what emerged from those long, nimble fingers. What world took shape on that flimsy paper? As though sensing my attention, he looked up suddenly, catching me mid-stare. Rather than look away, he held my gaze and smiled, then turned the napkin around to show me a sketch. A simple but striking rendering of a coffee cup with steam rising in spirals. I smiled back before I could think better of it, and returned to my Bible, cheeks burning. The afternoon light slanted golden through the windows as I nursed my coffee and pretended to read. The shop filled, then emptied as the hours passed. I ordered a second cup, something different this time, and found myself with a mocha that tasted faintly of chocolate, reminding me of the rare candies my mother would make at Christmas. I was still nursing this second cup when disaster struck. Rising to stretch my legs, Bible in one hand and half-full mug in the other, I turned directly into the path of another customer rushing toward the door. The collision sent hot coffee splashing across my shirt, the Bible slipping from my grasp to the floor. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." The hurried customer barely paused, tossing napkins in my direction before disappearing through the door. I stood frozen, coffee seeping through the thin fabric of my shirt, burning against my skin. Before I could move, Daniel was there, more napkins in hand. "Here, let me help." He knelt, retrieving my Bible from where it had fallen. I noticed him wince as he examined the leather cover now stained with coffee. "I'm so sorry about that. Ted's always in a rush, never looks where he's going." "It's fine," I managed, though it wasn't. The Bible had been my grandfather's, passed down when I turned 13. My father would be disappointed. Daniel gently blotted at the cover with a clean napkin. "We should get this dried properly, and your shirt." He glanced up, seeming to fully register my coffee-soaked state. "Come with me." Before I could protest, he'd called to someone named Ava to watch the counter and was guiding me through a door marked Employees Only. The back room was small but neat. A sink, a small table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies. Daniel motioned for me to sit, then wet a clean cloth with warm water. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to my Bible. I nodded, watching as he carefully, almost reverently, cleaned the leather cover. "My grandmother was religious," he offered quietly. "She'd have my hide if she saw me mishandle a Bible." "Was?" I echoed before I could stop myself. A shadow crossed his face. "She passed away last spring." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. He shrugged one shoulder. "She lived a good life. Always told me to be kind, be honest, and the rest would sort itself out." He finished with the Bible and set it aside to dry. "Now, about your shirt." Before I could respond, he was pulling his apron over his head, then reaching for the buttons of his own flannel shirt. "What are you?" I began, heat rising to my face. "Relax," he said with a small laugh. "I've got a t-shirt underneath. You can borrow this." He shrugged out of the blue and black checked flannel, revealing a plain black t-shirt beneath. He held the flannel out to me. "It's clean, I promise. Just put it on over yours until it dries." I hesitated, then accepted the offered garment. "Thank you." I'll give you a minute, he said, stepping toward the door. And I'll make you a fresh drink, on the house this time. When he was gone, I brought the flannel shirt to my face instinctively. It smelled of coffee and something else, something clean and sharp, like cedar. With trembling fingers, I slipped it on over my damp shirt, the fabric warm and soft against my skin. When I emerged from the back room, Daniel was waiting with a fresh cup. Tried something different this time, he said. Vanilla latte, wetter than what you had before. I accepted it gratefully, careful not to spill again. Thank you for everything. I should pay you for the shirt cleaning and the drinks. He waved away my words. Consider it customer service. Besides, you're providing me with entertainment on a slow day. Not often we get Rumspringa visitors. I sipped the new drink, startlingly sweet but pleasant, and found myself asking, do many come in? From my community? Daniel shook his head. Not really. A few occasionally. They usually come in groups, though. Safety in numbers, I guess. He studied me for a moment. You're brave, coming alone. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. But something in the way he said it made me want to be worthy of the assumption. What were you drawing? I asked, changing the subject. Earlier, on the napkin. Something like surprise flickered across his features. You noticed that? It was good, I said. The coffee cup. A genuine smile spread across his face. Thanks. I'm in art school. Well, community college, but majoring in art. Graphic design, specifically. He gestured vaguely. I did all the menus and logos here. The owner's my aunt. She lets me practice on her customers. I glanced around with new appreciation for the chalkboard art and the printed menus. They're very good, I offered, though I had no standard for comparison. Thanks. He seemed about to say more when a customer called him back to the counter. As the afternoon wore into evening, the cafe gradually emptied. I remained at my table, Bible open but largely ignored, sipping my third coffee of the day, a simple black coffee this time, bitter but clarifying. Outside, the streetlights flickered on as dusk gathered. Daniel appeared beside my table as I was gathering my things, preparing to return to the room I'd rented at a nearby boarding house for the duration of my Rumspringa. Closing time soon, he said, sliding into the chair across from me. His sketchbook, a proper one, not napkins, lay open between us. Pages of drawings, faces, buildings, abstract shapes, filled with an energy I couldn't articulate but felt drawn to nonetheless. These are wonderful, I said honestly, turning a page to find a landscape that reminded me painfully of home. Rolling hills and a distant farmhouse rendered in careful pencil strokes. Just practice, he shrugged, but I could tell he was pleased. What about you? What do you do? Back home, I mean. Carpentry, I replied, with my father and brothers. We build furniture mostly, some structures. Creating things with your hands, Daniel nodded. We have that in common. I hadn't thought of it that way before. My work is creative. It was necessary, practical. Yet looking at his drawings, I recognized something familiar in the care, the attention to detail. I suppose we do, I agreed. We fell into conversation as easily as breathing. He asked about my community, not prying questions about our strange customs, but genuine interest in our lives, our work, our beliefs. I found myself explaining things I'd never needed to articulate before. Why we lived apart, what we valued, what I'd been taught to believe. In turn, he told me about growing up in this town, about his dreams of working for a design firm in Philadelphia someday, about losing his parents young and being raised by his aunt, the coffee shop owner. Why do you stay? I asked as the last customer left. If Philadelphia is where you want to be? Daniel sighed, looking around the empty cafe. Aunt May needs the help, and college is expensive. I'm taking classes when I can afford them. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dreams take time. As we talked, the cafe fell into shadows, just the small lamps on each table creating pools of warm light. We'd moved to the window seat, watching as the town settled into evening quiet. Outside, a gentle rain had begun to fall, turning the street glassy and reflective. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said after a comfortable silence. "About Rumspringa?" I nodded. "Are you really supposed to experience things? Or are you just expected to realize how much better your community is and go back?" The question struck me with its precision. I'd been wondering the same thing since I'd arrived in town 3 weeks ago. "Officially, it's a time to see the world before baptism, to make an informed choice," I explained slowly. "But yes, most are expected to return. Most do." "And you?" His voice was soft, his gaze steady. "I don't know," I admitted, the words feeling like betrayal even as they left my mouth. "I thought I did." Daniel nodded as though he understood completely. We sat in silence, watching raindrops trace paths down the window glass. In the reflection, I could see both our faces superimposed over the wet street beyond, his features sharper, more defined than mine, his eyes seeming to hold something I couldn't name. He reached out suddenly, and before I could react, his fingers brushed against my temple, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "Sorry," he murmured, not sounding sorry at all. "It was bothering me." My heart hammered against my ribs. No one had ever touched me with such casual intimacy before. In my community, touch was practical, brief, a handshake, a clap on the shoulder. This was different. This lingered. "Tell me something," Daniel said, mercifully changing the subject. "Something you want to do. During your Rumspringa. Something you've never done before." I thought for a moment. "I want to see a film," I admitted. "In a proper theater." Daniel's smile was immediate and bright. "That's easy enough. What kind?" I shrugged, embarrassed. "I don't know many kinds. Just what I've heard about." "Well, what stories do you like when you read?" "Adventures," I said, after a moment's consideration. "Stories about people discovering new worlds." Something flickered in his expression. "I know just the one then. They're showing a classic at the old theater this weekend, Dead Poets Society. It's about breaking free, finding your voice. Very Rumspringa appropriate." I laughed despite myself. "Is that an invitation?" "Do you want it to be?" His voice had dropped lower, and I found I couldn't look away from his gaze. I should say no. I had come to see the world, to strengthen my faith through testing it. Not to, what? Make friends? Develop attachments to a place, a life I was meant to observe but not join? "Yes," I heard myself say. "I think I do." Daniel smiled, and I was lost. Utterly, completely lost. "I came here to see the world," I whispered, almost to myself. "But all I can see is him." "Hmm?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just thinking aloud." He nodded, accepting this, then glanced at his watch. "I should finish closing up." He stood, collecting our empty cups. At the counter, as I prepared to leave, he leaned close. "Have you ever had sugar in your coffee?" he asked, voice low as though sharing a secret. "No," I admitted. "Is it good?" "Life-changing," he whispered with mock seriousness, his fingers brushed against mine as he passed a small sugar packet across the counter. "Try it next time." The simple contact sent electricity up my arm. I stared at him, wondering if he felt it too, this impossible current between us. As I reluctantly gathered my Bible and Daniel's borrowed shirt, which he'd insisted I keep until tomorrow, he disappeared briefly into the back room. When he returned, he was holding a napkin folded carefully into quarters. "Here," he said, sliding it across the counter toward me, "for your collection." I unfolded it to find another sketch, this one of me. Head bent over my Bible, a coffee cup at my elbow. The likeness was striking, but what caught my breath was how he'd drawn me. Serene, thoughtful, almost luminous in the cafe light. "I thank you," I managed, carefully refolding the napkin and tucking it between the pages of my Bible. Daniel nodded, then hesitated before taking another napkin. He scribbled something quickly, folded it once, and slid it across to me. "Last thing," he said, voice casual, though something in his eyes was not casual at all. "Promise me you'll read this after you leave." "I promise," I said, taking the second napkin without unfolding it. He walked me to the door, flipping the sign to closed as we reached it. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the night air clean and cool. "Good night, Eli Yoder," he said softly. "Good night, Daniel." I realized I didn't know his last name. "Chen," he supplied with a small smile. "Daniel Chen." I nodded, committing it to memory, then stepped out into the night. I waited until I was a block away, under the yellow glow of a streetlight, before unfolding the second napkin with trembling fingers. Written in bold, sure strokes was a simple message. "Meet me at the river bridge after sunset tomorrow. Come alone." I stared at the words, my heart pounding so loudly, I was certain the few passers-by must hear it. The paper quivered in my grasp. What did this mean? Why the river bridge? Why alone? A sudden gust of wind snatched the napkin from my fingers. I lunged for it, but too late. It danced away on the breeze, tumbling all end over end down the empty street until it disappeared into the darkness. I stood frozen, the message already burned into my memory. Behind me, the lights of the coffee shop went dark, one by one, until only the small glow of the back room remained. Then that too winked out. Darkness. Silence. And tomorrow, a choice. The night enfolded me as I walked slowly back to my rented room, Daniel's shirt still warm around my shoulders, carrying his scent, his words, and a question I wasn't prepared to answer. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake in my rented room. Daniel's shirt folded neatly beside my Bible on the nightstand, his words echoing in my mind like a prayer without end. "Meet me at the river bridge after sunset. Come alone." The plain walls of my temporary lodging seemed to press in around me, the sparse furnishings a pale imitation of home, yet still too worldly to provide true comfort. Through the thin curtains, streetlights cast unfamiliar shadows across the ceiling, not the gentle moonlight I'd known all my life, filtering through my bedroom window and illuminating the quilt my grandmother had stitched for my 13th birthday. What did Daniel want? Why the secrecy, the specific location, and more troubling still, why did his invitation send both dread and anticipation coursing through my veins in equal measure? Morning arrived with no answers, only the weight of a decision that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. I attended to my daily routine, prayers, a simple breakfast at the boarding house, a letter home reporting sanitized versions of my experiences thus far. I wrote of the town's layout, the strange vehicles, the English clothing. I did not mention the cafe. I did not mention Daniel. The omission felt like a small betrayal, yet I couldn't bring myself to set his name on paper, as though doing so would make this, whatever this was, too real to deny. By afternoon, restlessness drove me to the small public library, where I sought refuge among shelves of books. There, surrounded by more volumes than I'd ever seen in one place, I searched for something, anything, to distract me from the decision that awaited sunset. Instead, I found myself in a quiet corner, flipping through an art book, studying the play of light and shadow in paintings centuries old, wondering if Daniel had studied these same images, if his fingers had traced these same pages. Hours passed, measured by the steady tick of the wall clock and the gradual shift of sunlight across the reading tables. As closing time approached, a librarian with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair touched my shoulder gently. "We're closing soon, dear," she said, glancing at the stack of art books I'd accumulated. "First time here?" I nodded, carefully closing the volume before me. A collection of Vermeer's works, the quiet domesticity of his scenes, both foreign and familiar. "You have an eye for the classics," she observed. "Are you a student?" "No," I replied, then hesitated. "Just curious," she smiled knowingly. "Curiosity is its own form of education. You're welcome back anytime." I thanked her and gathered my belongings, stepping out into the late afternoon sun. The town bustled with end-of-day activity, people leaving offices in pressed suits, children walking home from sports practice, couples meeting for early dinners. Normal life unfolding all around me, yet I felt apart from it all, a spectator rather than a participant. My feet carried me, almost without conscious thought, past the coffee shop. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Daniel behind the counter, laughing at something a customer had said. The easy grace of his movements, the warm tilt of his smile, both now familiar after just one day, yet somehow I felt I'd known them always. As though sensing my gaze, he looked up suddenly, eyes finding mine through the glass. For a heartbeat, the world around us seemed to still. Then he smiled, a small private thing, and nodded once, a question in his eyes. I nodded back before I could think better of it, then hurried away, my decision made in that silent exchange of glances. Sunset found me at the edge of my community's land, standing before the simple farmhouse where I'd lived my entire life. I'd returned ostensibly to collect more clothes for my extended stay in town, though in truth, I needed to see it to remind myself of what awaited my return after Rumspringa. My younger brothers were tending to evening chores in the barn. Through the kitchen window, I could see my mother kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, my sisters setting the table for the evening meal. My father would be in his workshop until called for supper, completing the day's orders with the same steady hands that had taught me my craft. A life of certainty, of belonging, of boundaries clear as the white fence that marked our property line. And yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, I slipped away unnoticed, following the well-worn path that led from our land to the small river that separated us from the English world. The bridge, a simple wooden structure, sturdy but weathered, was rarely used by my people. We had little reason to cross it except for necessary supply runs into town. Tonight, it would bear my weight for a very different purpose. The sunset's final glow still lingered when I arrived, casting long shadows across the wooden planks. The bridge stood empty, the surrounding wooded area quiet, save for the gentle gurgle of the river below and the evening song of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. Had I misunderstood? Had he changed his mind? I leaned against the rail, watching the water flow beneath, dark and swift in some places, smooth as glass in others, where it pooled around fallen logs and river stones. Minutes stretched, measured by the steady beat of my heart and the gradual deepening of twilight around me. Then, a soft footfall on wooden planks. A warm presence at my side. "You came!" Daniel's voice was quiet, tinged with what sounded like relief. I turned to find him standing closer than I expected, close enough that I could see the last light of day reflected in his eyes. He carried a small lantern, its flame not yet lit, and a leather-bound book tucked under one arm. "I wasn't sure you would," he continued when I remained silent. "Neither was I admitted. The honesty hung between us, fragile as spun glass. Daniel nodded, accepting this, then reached into his pocket for matches to light the lantern. In the gathering dusk, the small flame bloomed to life, casting a gentle golden glow over our faces. "I come here sometimes," he said, gesturing toward a path that led from the bridge down to the riverbank. "To think, to sketch. It's quiet." I followed him down the narrow trail, our shoulders occasionally brushing in the dim light. The path opened to a small clearing by the water's edge, sheltered by a large willow tree whose branches dipped low, creating a secluded space separate from the world beyond. Daniel set the lantern on a flat rock, its light catching on the slow-moving water and the occasional darting presence of early fireflies emerging for their nightly dance. He settled on the ground, back against the willow's trunk, and opened his sketchbook across his lap. After a moment's hesitation, I joined him, careful to leave space between us. "You brought your Bible again," he observed, nodding toward the book I still clutched. I glanced down, surprised to find it in my hands. I hadn't consciously decided to bring it, yet here it was, as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. "I always have it with me," I explained, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. "It's an anchor." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "We all need something to hold on to." He flipped through his sketchbook until he found a blank page, then began to trace light, exploratory lines across the paper. "For me, it's this. When the world gets too loud or too confusing, I can make sense of it here." I watched his hand move across the page, creating order from emptiness. "What are you drawing?" "This place," he said, not looking up. "The river, the willow, The light, his pencil paused. You. Heat bloomed across my face, and I was grateful for the dim light that hid my reaction. Why? Now he did look up, his expression serious. Because I want to remember it. All of it. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. We sat in silence for a while, the only sounds, the soft scratch of his pencil against paper and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Above us, stars began to appear, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Can I ask you something? Daniel finally broke the silence, setting his sketchbook aside. I nodded. What's it like? Living the way you do? The question was asked without judgment, with genuine curiosity instead. I considered it carefully. Simple, I said at last. There's clarity. Everyone knows their place, their purpose. The rules are clear, the path straight. And that's good? He asked softly. It can be, I admitted. There's peace in certainty. But? I looked at him, startled by his perception. What makes you think there's a but? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. You're here, aren't you? On Rumspringa, looking beyond. I turned my gaze back to the river, watching the play of lantern light on its surface. Maybe I'm just confirming what I already know. And what's that? That the world outside has nothing I need. Daniel was quiet for so long that I finally looked back at him. He was studying me intently, as though trying to read something written in a language he only partially understood. And what do you need, Eli Yoder? The question hung in the air between us, weightier than it had any right to be. What did I need? Faith, family, community. These were the answers I'd been taught, the answers I'd never questioned. Yet sitting here, in this moment, those words felt incomplete somehow. I don't know anymore, I whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. Daniel shifted closer, his shoulder now touching mine. I've always been an outsider here, he confessed, reaching down to trace ripples on the river's surface with his fingertips. Too different for a small town, too tied to it to leave. But with you... He hesitated, water dripping from his fingers. With you, I finally feel at home. The word struck something deep within me, a chord I hadn't known existed until now. Home. What did that mean anymore? The farmhouse where I'd grown up? The community that had shaped me? Or could it be something, someone else entirely? My whole life is bound by faith and family, I said, voice barely audible above the river's gentle flow. How can I step beyond that? For you. The question wasn't accusatory, it was genuine, desperate. How could I reconcile these worlds, the one I'd always known, and this new one opening before me? Filled with coffee shops and art books and Daniel's smile in lantern light? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for my hand where it rested on the ground between us. Slowly, deliberately, he laced his fingers through mine. I should have pulled away. Every teaching, every sermon, every cautionary tale from my youth told me to withdraw from this touch, this closeness. Instead, I remained still, heart thundering in my chest as our joined hand rested on the cool earth beneath the willow. Eli, he said softly, my name a prayer on his lips. Daniel, I echoed, equally reverent. The lantern light danced over his features, highlighting the curve of his cheek, the subtle cleft in his chin, the questioning hope in his eyes. He leaned closer, his free hand rising to my face, hovering just shy of touching. May I? He whispered, and though he didn't specify what he was asking, I knew. Time seemed suspended as I battled 18 years of teachings against the overwhelming pull of this moment. In the end, it wasn't even a choice, merely an inevitable surrender. I nodded once, the barest movement. Daniel's hand cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing gently across my skin as though I were something precious, something that might break or disappear if handled too roughly. Then he was leaning in, his breath warm against my lips for a heartbeat before they met mine. The first touch was hesitant, questioning, a brush so light it might have been imagined. Then he pressed closer, and the world as I knew it fell away. I had no reference for this, no comparison to draw. Nothing in my sheltered life had prepared me for the gentle pressure of another's lips against mine, for the way my body seemed to dissolve and reform around this single point of contact. My hand rose of its own accord to clutch at his shirt. Whether to push him away or pull him closer, I couldn't have said. Daniel drew back slightly, his forehead resting against mine, both of us breathing as though we'd run for miles. "Okay," he whispered. In answer, I closed the distance between us again, my inexperience forgotten in the overwhelming need to recapture that feeling of connection. This kiss was deeper, more certain. His hand slid from my cheek to the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair as he drew me closer. When we finally parted, the night had fully descended around us, the lantern's glow creating a small circle of warmth in the darkness. We remained close, neither willing to break the fragile bubble that seemed to enclose us. Reality, however, could not be held at bay forever. "If anyone finds us here..." My voice trembled as I gave voice to the fear that edged this newfound joy. "They'll send me home in disgrace, maybe worse." Daniel's expression grew serious, but his hand remained firm in mine. "Then we'll face it together," he said, voice gentle but resolute. "Whatever comes." The simple certainty in his words both comforted and terrified me. This wasn't just a moment's indiscretion, a youthful experiment to be confessed and forgotten. This was something deeper, something with consequence. "How can you be so sure?" I asked. He released my hand, reaching instead for his sketchbook. He flipped through several pages before finding what he sought, then carefully extracted a small watercolor painting tucked between the pages. "I painted this last night," he said, passing it to me, "after you left the cafe." In the lantern light, I studied the image. Two silhouettes walking hand in hand down a city street. Tall buildings rising around them, their faces turned toward each other rather than the path ahead. The figures were indistinct, yet somehow I knew they were meant to be us, Daniel and me, in some unnamed future where such a scene might be possible. "I dream of a life where we're free to walk anywhere," he said softly, watching my face as I took in the painting. "Together." My fingers traced the painted silhouettes, something both painful and sweet blooming in my chest. "This isn't a small town," I observed. Daniel shook his head. "Philadelphia, where I want to study. Where we could just be, without everyone knowing our business, without judgment." The idea was so foreign, so impossible, that I nearly laughed. Instead, I found myself saying, "Tell me about it. This city life you imagine." And he did. As the night deepened around us, Daniel painted a picture with words of a life I'd never considered. Apartments with windows overlooking busy streets, museums filled with art from around the world, restaurants serving foods whose names I couldn't pronounce, communities where differences were celebrated rather than suppressed. "We could have a small place at first," he said, his enthusiasm building as he sketched this imaginary future. "Nothing fancy. I'd finish school, find work with a design firm. You could do carpentry. There's always demand for quality craftsmanship." "And on Sundays?" I asked quietly. He paused, understanding the real question beneath my words. "There are churches," he said carefully. "Different kinds, or none. It would be your choice." Choice. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. In my community, the individual was subordinate to the collective, personal desires secondary to the greater good of all. Choice, as Daniel meant it, was a foreign concept, almost dangerous in its freedom. "I came seeking freedom beyond the fields," I whispered, still tracing the outlines of the figures in his painting. "But I found you." I looked up, meeting his gaze in the lantern light. I don't know if that was God's plan or a test of my faith. "Maybe neither," Daniel suggested gently. "Maybe both." We fell silent again, the weight of possibility settling around us like the willow's drooping branches. The lantern's flame flickered low, oil nearly spent. "It's getting late," Daniel finally said, reluctance evident in his voice. "Your family will worry." "They think I'm in town," I reminded him, "at the boarding house." "Still." He gathered his sketchbook, but hesitated over the watercolor still in my hands. After a moment's consideration, he gently folded it and pressed it back into my palm. "Keep it," he said, "to remember." As if I could forget any part of this night, we rose, brushing soil and grass from our clothes, and made our way back up the path to the bridge. The lantern, now barely glowing, cast long shadows ahead of us. At the bridge's center, we paused, standing at the literal crossing point between my world and his. Daniel turned to face me, his expression serious in the fading light. "I won't ask you to choose," he said softly. "Not now. This," he gestured between us, "is too new, too fragile for ultimatums." Relief and disappointment warred within me at his words. "Then what happens now?" I asked. He reached for my hand one last time, his touch warm against my skin. "Now we take each day as it comes. You continue your Rumspringa. I'll be at the cafe, and here—" He nodded toward the bridge and the river below. "Whenever you want to meet." It was a reprieve, a space to breathe before decisions must be made. I nodded gratefully. Daniel smiled, then glanced down at the watercolor still clutched in my hand. "Eli," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "if you ever choose to leave this life behind, meet me in that city by the bridge." He leaned in, pressing one final feather-light kiss to my lips, then stepped back into the gathering darkness. "The Independence Visitor Center. First Saturday of any month. Noon." Before I could respond, he was moving away, crossing to the town side of the bridge. I watched his silhouette grow smaller, swallowed by shadows, until only the faint glow of his lantern remained visible, a lone star moving steadily away. I stood alone on the bridge, heart pounding, the watercolor clutched in my hand, torn between two worlds, the one behind me, solid with certainty and tradition, and the one ahead, hazy with possibility and Daniel's retreating light. The night air carried the scent of rain not yet fallen, of earth warming for spring planting, of choices not yet made but hovering on the horizon. I slipped the painting carefully between the pages of my Bible and began the walk home. Each step an echo of the question that now defined my existence. Faith or freedom, family or future, certainty or chance. Or was there, perhaps, some middle path I couldn't yet envision? Some way to honor both the life I'd been given and the one I now glimpsed possible. The questions followed me like shadows as I made my way back to the farmhouse, its windows glowing with lamplight, my mother likely watching for my return. Before I reached the door, I paused in the darkness of our yard, looking back toward the bridge now hidden by distance and night. Somewhere beyond it, Daniel was walking home too, perhaps thinking of me as I thought of him. "Choose," the night seemed to whisper, the word carried on a breeze that rustled the emerging leaves of our orchard. "Choose." But not tonight. Tonight, I would return to my family, bow my head in evening prayers, and lie in my childhood bed with the memory of lantern light on water and the ghost of Daniel's lips still warm on mine. Tomorrow would bring its own decisions, its own struggles. Tomorrow, I would consider the price of freedom and the weight of faith. Tomorrow. For now, I held the watercolor close to my heart and carried the bridge's promise with me into the quiet house, a secret light to illuminate the darkness that suddenly seemed to fill every corner of the life I'd always known. Days passed like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold, yet each droplet leaving its mark before slipping away. I divided my time between two worlds, mornings and early afternoons with my family, helping with spring planting and furniture orders that had accumulated during my absence. Evenings in town, ostensibly to experience English life, but in truth, to steal precious hours at the cafe where Daniel worked. We established an unspoken routine. I would arrive an hour before closing, claiming the corner table with my Bible open before me, though increasingly its pages remained unturned as I watched Daniel move behind the counter. Sometimes he would join me during lulls, sliding into the seat across from mine with a fresh cup of coffee and questions about my day. Other times, when customers kept him busy, our communication consisted only of glances and small smiles across the room. And twice a week, after the cafe closed, we would meet at the bridge, following the narrow path down to our spot beneath the willow. There, with only fireflies and stars as witnesses, we would talk for hours. Daniel of his dreams for the future, me of my childhood, and the traditions that had shaped me. Sometimes we would sit in comfortable silence, his head resting on my shoulder, as he sketched the night-draped river before us. And sometimes, in the sheltering darkness of the willow's curtain, we would find each other's lips, each kiss, a small rebellion against the world that would keep us apart. It was during one such evening, nearly 3 weeks after our first meeting at the bridge, that the fragile balance of my divided existence began to shift. "When does it end?" Daniel asked as we sat side by side, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the water. "Your Rome, Springa." I tensed slightly. We had carefully avoided this topic, focusing instead on immediate moments, the next meeting, the next day, never beyond. "Soon," I admitted, the word falling between us like a stone into still water. "The baptismal classes begin after harvest." Daniel's fingers, laced with mine on the blanket he'd brought, tightened almost imperceptibly. "And then? Then I make my choice." I turned to face him, his features half illuminated by our lantern. "To be baptized and join the church fully, or—" I couldn't finish. "Or not," he supplied quietly. "Or not," I echoed. Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken questions. "Have you decided?" he finally asked, voice carefully neutral despite the weight of the question. I looked out across the water, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't know how to choose between my soul and my heart." Daniel shifted, turning fully toward me. "Why do you believe you have to?" "Because the ordning is clear," I said, referencing the unwritten but rigid code that governed Amish life. "To reject it is to reject salvation." "And do you believe that?" Daniel's question was gentle, without challenge. I had been asking myself the same thing with increasing frequency as the weeks passed. The certainty that had once been my foundation now seemed to shift beneath my feet like sand. "I was raised to believe it," I said slowly, "that there is one path to God, and it lies through submission to the community and its ways. But—" I met his gaze finally. "But I've never felt closer to God than when I'm with you." The confession, once spoken, hung in the air between us. Heretical by everything I'd been taught, yet truer than any prayer I'd ever uttered. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and something deeper, more profound, passing across his features. "Eli," he whispered, my name a benediction on his lips. "How can something that feels this right be wrong?" I continued, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken. "When I pray for guidance, I feel led toward you, not away. What if—" I hesitated, then pressed on. "What if there's more than one path? What if God is bigger than the boundaries we draw?" Daniel was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "My grandmother used to say that God is not confined to churches of any kind," he finally said. "That the divine is found in love, in beauty, in moments of genuine connection." He squeezed my hand. "In people. The Bible says—" "I know what some interpretations say," he interrupted gently. "But the same book also says God is love. Above all else, love." His free hand rose to cup my cheek. "Does this feel like sin to you?" I leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly. "No," I whispered. "It feels like coming home." Later that night, as Daniel walked me back to the bridge, he stopped suddenly in the middle of the wooden structure. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small object and pressed it into my palm. It was a key, simple and brass, attached to a small wooden tag carved with the number 217. "What's this?" I asked, turning it over in my hand. "My apartment key," he said, a note of nervousness in his voice I'd never heard before. "I spoke with my aunt. There's a position opening at the cafe, full-time, and she has a spare room above the shop that comes with the job." He took a deep breath. "If you wanted to stay, after Rumspringa—" I stared at the key, its weight suddenly immense in my hand. "I'm not asking you to decide right now," he hurried on. "I just wanted you to know that there's an option." A door, if you want it. No pressure. No expectations. Daniel, you can give it back tomorrow if it's too much. He continued, words tumbling out. I just thought... I silenced him with a kiss, brief but firm. My hand closing around the key until its edges pressed into my palm. Thank you, I said simply when we parted. He nodded, relief evident in his expression. Good night, Eli. Good night, Daniel. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, the key hidden beneath my mattress, its presence like a live coal burning through the straw ticking. Outside my window, the familiar landscape of our farm lay bathed in moonlight. The barn where I'd learned to milk cows at my father's side. The workshop where my hands had first shaped wood into useful beauty. The orchard where my mother and I had harvested apples every fall of my life. And beyond, invisible but felt like a pulse beneath the skin, the bridge. Daniel, possibility. I must have fallen asleep eventually, for I woke to my mother's gentle hand on my shoulder and the pale light of dawn seeping through my window. Eli, she said softly, your father needs you in the workshop. The miller's order must be finished by noon. I nodded, pushing aside the lingering fragments of dreams. I'll be right there. She paused at the door, studying me with the perceptive gaze that had always seemed to see straight through my childhood fabrications. You've been in town often, she observed. It's Rumspringa, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I'm supposed to see the world. And what do you see there that keeps you returning? The question was innocent enough, but something in her tone set my heart racing. Different ways, I said carefully. Different people. She nodded slowly. Your father and I only want your happiness, Eli. And your salvation. Remember that in your explorations. Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that my carefully constructed double life was more transparent than I'd believed. The day passed in a blur of woodworking, sanding maple tabletops, fitting cherry drawer fronts, applying oil to bring out the grain of oak cabinet doors. The familiar rhythm of the work, the scent of sawdust and linseed oil, the quiet companionship of my father and brothers working alongside me. All of it wrapped around me like a well-worn quilt, comfortable and known. Yet beneath it all ran an undercurrent of restlessness, of anticipation for the evening when I would see Daniel again. As we cleaned the workshop at day's end, my father paused beside me, his calloused hand resting on my shoulder. Bishop Stoltzfus asked about you yesterday, he said casually, too casually. Wondered when you'd be returning fully from Rumspringa. I froze, brush suspended over the workbench I'd been cleaning. What did you tell him? That it was between you and God. He studied me, eyes so like my own, looking deep. But he mentioned he'd heard you've been spending time at an English cafe. Said his cousin saw you there more than once. Ice formed in my veins. I've tried different places, I said, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. To see what the world offers. And what does it offer that we don't? The question hung between us, weighted with 18 years of shared life and centuries of shared tradition. Different perspectives, I said finally. Different ways of seeing. My father nodded slowly. Just remember, Eli, not all that glitters is gold. The English world looks bright from a distance, but it's built on shifting sand. He squeezed my shoulder once. Your mother has supper waiting. That evening, I made my excuses earlier than usual, claiming a headache. Instead of retiring to my room, however, I slipped out the back door and made my way toward town on foot, a journey of nearly 3 miles. The physical exertion helped clear my mind, each step taking me further from the growing tension at home and closer to the one place I felt truly free. The cafe was unusually busy when I arrived. A small crowd gathered near the counter where Daniel worked, his Aunt May beside him. She noticed me first, her face lighting with recognition. Eli, come join us! We're celebrating! Daniel looked up at her words, his eyes finding mine across the room. He smiled, but there was something strained in his expression that set alarm bells ringing in my head. I made my way through the small crowd, accepting a mug of cider someone pressed into my hands. What's the celebration? I asked, standing at the edge of the group, conscious of my plain clothes among their colorful English attire. Daniel's been accepted to the Philadelphia College of Art and Design, May announced proudly, her arm around her nephew's shoulders. Full scholarship for the fall semester! The room erupted in congratulations. I stood frozen, cider forgotten in my hands, eyes locked with Daniel's across the space between us. Philadelphia, the city in his painting, the dream he'd spoken of by the river, the dream that did not include me. I managed a smile that felt brittle on my face, raised my mug and salute along with the others. Daniel extracted himself from his aunt's embrace and made his way to my side. I was going to tell you tonight, he said quietly, leading me to the relative privacy of my usual corner table. At the bridge. Congratulations, I said, the word hollow in my mouth. When do you leave? Not until August. He reached for my hand under the table, hidden from view. Eli, this doesn't change anything. But it changed everything, and we both knew it. Philadelphia was nearly 100 miles away, might as well be 1,000 for someone like me, who had never traveled more than 20 miles from home before Rumspringa. You should be celebrating, I said, withdrawing my hand from his. Go, we'll talk later. Eli, please, I insisted, forcing a smile. This is your moment. Enjoy it. Reluctantly, he returned to the celebration, though his eyes found mine frequently across the room. I sat alone, watching as his friends and neighbors congratulated him, patted his back, ruffled his hair affectionately. This was his community, his world, bright, accepting, full of possibilities I could scarcely imagine. And come August, he would leave it and me behind. I slipped out while Daniel was distracted, leaving my untouched cider on the table. Outside, the spring evening had turned cool, a light rain beginning to fall. I pulled my coat tighter around me and began the long walk home, each step heavier than the last. I didn't go to the bridge that night, nor the next. I avoided the cafe, staying instead on our farm, throwing myself into work with an intensity that drew concerned glances from my mother and approving nods from my father. Good to see you focusing on what matters, he said on the third day, as we repaired fence posts damaged by winter storms. Rumspringa is important, but so's remembering where you belong. Where did I belong? The question haunted me through sleepless nights and distracted days. Each sunrise found me more confused than the last, torn between duty and desire, between the solid ground of tradition and the wild, uncertain flight of freedom Daniel represented. On the fourth day of my self-imposed exile, as I split firewood behind the house, my youngest sister Hannah approached, her small face solemn beneath her prayer covering. There's someone asking for you, she said quietly. At the end of the drive. My heart leapt. Who? An English boy, she replied, with dark hair. I set down the axe, wiping sweat from my brow. Did he say what he wanted? Hannah shook her head. Just to speak with you. She hesitated. Father saw him from the field. He's coming home now. The warning was clear. I nodded my thanks and watched her hurry back to the house, her bare feet comment on the worn path. Then I turned toward our long gravel driveway, where a solitary figure stood beside the mailbox, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Even at this distance, I would know him anywhere. I glanced toward the western field where my father had been working with my brothers, saw their figures making their way toward the house. I had minutes at most. I walked quickly down the drive, heart hammering against my ribs. Daniel straightened as I approached, relief washing over his features. Eli, he breathed, I was worried. You shouldn't be here, I said, though my traitor heart sang at the sight of him. My father's coming. You didn't come to the bridge, he said, ignoring my warning, or the cafe. I had to see you, to explain. There's nothing to explain, I interrupted. You're following your dream, as you should. Not without you, he said fiercely. That key I gave you, I meant it, Eli. I want you to come with me. I stared at him, stunned, speechless. The apartment comes with the job at May's, yes. He continued rapidly, words tumbling out as though he feared I'd stop him. But it's just temporary, a stepping stone. I've been looking at places in Philadelphia, small studios we could afford together. You could find carpentry work there. I know you could. And I could study, and we could— Daniel! I cut him off, hearing the crunch of my father's footsteps on gravel behind me. Stop! No, listen to me. I love you, Eli. I think I've loved you since you walked into the cafe with your Bible and your questions and your eyes that see everything as though for the first time. I love— Eli. My father's voice, stern and questioning, called from behind me. Who is this? I turned slowly, feeling as though I moved underwater, to find my father standing a few yards away, his expression unreadable. This is Daniel, I said, voice surprisingly steady. A friend from town. Friend, my father repeated, the word carrying weight and suspicion. Daniel stepped forward, hand extended. Daniel Chen, sir. I work at the cafe in town. My father ignored the outstretched hand. The one my son has been frequenting? Yes, sir. And you've come to our home because— Daniel hesitated, glancing at me. In that moment, I saw our futures balanced on a knife's edge, everything that might be weighed against everything that was. I came to invite Eli to a gathering at the cafe, Daniel said smoothly, lowering his hand. A farewell for a mutual friend who's moving away. His eyes met mine. I should have called first, but I don't have your number. We don't have phones, my father replied coldly. As I'm sure Eli has explained. Of course. My mistake. Daniel took a step back. I should go. Thank you for your time, Mr. Yoder. He turned to me, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes held volumes. Hope to see you there, Eli. Saturday at 7. With that, he walked to his car. His aunt's, I realized, parked on the road beyond our mailbox. I watched him go, feeling my father's gaze heavy upon me. Inside, my father said, when Daniel's car disappeared around the bend. We need to talk. The talk was more of a pronouncement. As my mother and siblings busied themselves with evening chores, my father sat me down at the kitchen table, his Bible open before him. I've been patient, Eli, he began, voice measured. Rumspringa is a time for testing, for seeing what lies beyond our ways. But it is not a time for losing yourself to worldly temptations. I haven't— He held up a hand, silencing me. Bishop Stoltzfus told me he saw you at the river bridge last week. With that boy. His expression darkened. In an embrace that no friend should share with another. Ice formed in my veins. The bishop had seen us. Had seen me kissing Daniel under the willow tree, an act I had believed hidden from all eyes save God's. What you're feeling is confusion, my father continued, his tone softening slightly. The English world is seductive. It promises freedom without consequence, pleasure without responsibility. But these are false promises, Eli, hollow. He turned his Bible toward me, finger pointing to familiar verses in Leviticus that condemned men lying with men. Words I had read countless times, words that had haunted my prayers since the first stirrings of feelings I didn't understand as a young teen. This is sin, he said simply. A test of your faith, perhaps, but one you must overcome. I stared at the verses, black ink on thin paper, words written thousands of years ago in a world I could scarcely imagine. Words that had shaped my entire existence, defined the boundaries of what I was allowed to be. What if it's not? I whispered. My father frowned. Not what? A sin. I raised my eyes to meet his. What if it's not a sin to love someone? Eli, God is love, I pressed on, echoing Daniel's words from Nights by the River. Above all things, love. Isn't that what Pastor Lapp preaches? That the greatest commandment is to love. Not this kind of attachment, my father said firmly. This is not love, Eli. It's temptation, confusion. The boy is filling your head with English ideas that have no place in God's plan. How do you know God's plan doesn't include Daniel? The question escaped before I could stop it, hanging in the air between us like a challenge. My father's expression hardened. Because God's plan is clear in His Word. And his word says, this is abomination. His word also says to love your neighbor, I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. To judge not, lest ye be judged. Enough! My father's palm slammed against the table, making me jump. This ends now, Eli. Your Rumspringa is over. You will remain home, prepare for baptism, and put this phase behind you. And if I can't? My voice was barely audible, yet the question filled the room like thunder. My father's expression softened slightly, concern replacing anger. You can, with prayer and guidance, with the support of your family and community. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. This is your home, Eli, your place. The English boy will go to his city and forget you. But we will always be here. I need to think, I said, withdrawing my hand. To pray. He nodded slowly. Of course. Pray for guidance, for strength, against temptation. God will show you the path back to righteousness. But as I knelt beside my bed that night, prayers refused to form. Instead, memories flooded my mind. Daniel's smile across the cafe counter, his fingers laced with mine beneath the willow, his voice whispering, I love you, on our drive. Love. Such a simple word for such a complex feeling. I reached beneath my mattress, extracting the key Daniel had given me. Its weight was solid in my palm, its promise both terrifying and exhilarating. A door, he had called it. A choice. The next morning, I rose before dawn, moving silently through the sleeping house. In the pale light, I wrote 2 letters, one to my parents explaining as best I could, one to my siblings telling them I loved them always. I left both on my neatly made bed. Then I packed a small bag with essential clothing, my Bible, and the watercolor Daniel had painted of us walking hand in hand in Philadelphia. I added the small wooden pit where I kept my Rumspringa savings. Not much, but enough perhaps for a new beginning. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when I stepped outside, closing the door silently behind me. The farm lay peaceful around me, the only home I'd ever known, the place that had shaped me, nurtured me, and now, I feared, would remember me only as lost. I'm sorry, I whispered to the silent buildings, to the family still sleeping within. I love you, always. Then I turned and began walking down the long driveway, past the mailbox where Daniel had stood, toward the road that would lead me to town. To the cafe, to him. The bridge appeared before me as the first rays of morning sun broke over the horizon, illuminating the weathered wood in golden light. I paused in its center, looking back toward the community I was leaving, then forward toward whatever lay ahead. A figure stood at the far end, silhouetted against the rising sun. For a moment, I thought I was imagining him, a projection of my hope and fear combined. Then he moved, stepping forward onto the bridge. And I knew, I thought you might come, Daniel said quietly as we met in the middle, the river flowing steadily beneath our feet. After yesterday. How did you know I'd take this path? He smiled, the gentle curve of his lips achingly familiar. Because it's halfway between both worlds, the perfect place for a decision. I looked down at my bag, at the life reduced to so little. I'm leaving, I said, the words still strange to my ears. I can't stay, not now. Daniel nodded, understanding darkening his eyes. What happened? The bishop saw us, here at the river. He told my father. Eli, I'm so sorry. Don't be, I interrupted. It forced me to choose. And I've chosen. I held up the key he had given me, sunlight glinting off its brass surface. If the offer still stands. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. It stands, he said, reaching for me. I stepped into his embrace, letting my bag drop to the wooden planks beneath us. His arms wrapped around me, solid and sure, his heartbeat strong against my chest. What about Philadelphia? I asked, voice muffled against his shoulder. We'll figure it out, he said, drawing back to look at me. Together, one step at a time. His hand cupped my cheek. The first step is getting you settled, safe, The rest will come. I'm afraid, I admitted. I know. He pressed his forehead to mine. So am I. But not of this. Never of us. The sun climbed higher as we stood there, poised between worlds on the bridge that had first brought us together. Behind me lay everything I had ever known: certainty, community, tradition. Before me stood Daniel, and with him a future uncertain yet luminous with possibility. Ready? He asked finally, extending his hand. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle into my bones, not as a burden, but as a foundation upon which something new might be built. Ready, I said, placing my hand in his. Together, we walked off the bridge, toward town, toward his aunt's cafe where a spare room and a job awaited, toward a life neither of us could fully envision yet. The key pressed against my palm, clutched tight in my free hand, no longer just a possibility, but a promise. The Rumspringa that was meant to confirm my faith had led me to a different kind of devotion. One step at a time, hand in hand with Daniel, I walked into the morning light toward a future we would build together, grounded in a love that felt, despite everything I'd been taught, like the most sacred thing I'd ever known, the end.